Sandbox, MMORPG. Two things that probably shouldn't go together. Sort of like wizards and guns. Although, I'd probably give this a watch. Over the years, many studios have attempted to jam these two things together, with the most recent attempt being PAX Day, with June Awakening releasing later this year. And if we go way back to the early days of MMOs, we have Ultima Online. But today, I want to talk about one of the most sandiest of sandbox MMORPGs.
I don't like sand.
Boasting one of the most in-depth crafting systems you've ever seen, and arguably one of the first of its kind to dig this deep into the sandbox genre. I am, of course, talking about Wurm Online. Released in 2006, Wurm Online was the brainchild of Rolf Jansen and Marcus Persson, aka Notch, who invented Minecraft. And just like the original Minecraft, this MMO is using Java. To clarify, Wurm is developed in Java and uses OpenGL for rendering the game. But don't let this small detail put you off, because as janky as it might look, this is by far one of the most complex MMORPGs I've ever played. And believe me, I've played quite a few of them, because that's what I like to do here on this channel, play dead relevant MMORPGs and then do complex reviews that get no views. Like and subscribe. In 2007, Notch would leave Wurm to go onto other projects. However, Wurm chugged along, and to this day you can download and play Wurm Online for free from the Steam store. So that's exactly what I did. So if you want to see how I got on with this almost 20-year-old survival MMORPG sandbox multiplayer, whatever the fuck it wants to call itself, then stick around and watch me suffer as I play Wurm Online in 2024. The good news is the game is very easy to install. It is available on Steam, it's only a whopping 1.3 gigabytes in size, and it's free to play. And to get started, you just need to enter a character name in the box above, and then simply click play. And that's it, you're away on your adventure, and the first thing it does is it dumps you into a tutorial. So straight away I was impressed because unlike many games, you can actually see your feet when in first person mode. And I know what you're thinking, this isn't the level of details you thought I'd go into when you clicked on a video about a MMO which is almost 20 years old. But also, this is Fallout 4 and you have no feet when you go into first person mode, and it really annoys me, and this seems like the perfect time to bring it up in a conversation. But anyway, moving on. The first thing I noticed is that I looked like an NPC from the console classic GoldenEye on the N64. Despite the bottom left saying that there was 3 players in total in this area, including myself, I was unable to see any other players. Is this an early indication as to what I should expect? Perhaps, but either way, I chugged along to see what else this MMO has to offer. The tutorial was broken up into different sections, teaching you about the different mechanics of the game. The first one being how to climb this very steep slope. Come get some. It's safe to say I was 30 seconds in and I already had some concerns. Next up was a lesson in digging, and it's worth pointing out that you can pretty much interact with anything in the environment around you. I then moved on to cutting down trees, I got taught how to do mining, and then I was taught how to equip my armor. And just like that, I was ready to be thrown into the world of Wurm. There were 3 servers to pick from. One had PvE and PvP but on separate islands. Another one was PvE only, but you could steal from each other's houses. And the last one was a PvP free-for-all, which I'm sure I was too care-bear to go to. Naturally, I just went for the obvious choice, the standard server on the PvE island. I mean, I figured it would be the most populated, not because I'm scared of PvP. As I watched the whole world around me load up, I couldn't help but feel quite alone again. There was no other players in my vicinity from what I could tell. So being the explorer that I am, I started to look around to see if I could find any indications of life on this game. And the first thing I found was a sign telling me not to cut down the trees. I entered the main building and walked into a courtyard filled with NPCs, and in the distance I thought I saw another player. Unfortunately, it was just a town guard. When exploring these old MMOs and doing these reviews, I tried to make it a rule that I don't jump into zone chat for the first couple of hours and ask for help. I want to explore these games as independently and solo as possible, unless there's a natural occurrence of socializing. But I'll be honest, this game was making that tough because there wasn't too much to go on as to what I should be doing, and there was no one around to actually speak to. I eventually ran into signs of player activity in the form of these half-built houses, and from what I can tell, I was in the next village over. The global freedom chat had a couple of players interacting with one another, so I knew that the game wasn't completely dead. I just had to try and find these other players. Welcome to Apple Hill Overlook. Population, just me apparently. There's no one around once again. I started to get the feeling that maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was playing too late at night and everyone had already logged off. So I decided to stick a pin in it, quit the game, and return the next day. So I jumped on the next day, and this time I had a game plan. That plan was to leave the village and go build a house in the middle of the woods. Unfortunately, the in-game map wasn't very helpful in helping me to determine which direction I needed to go. It had 2 purple dots on it, and I had no idea what they were for. As luck would have it, I was about to run into a bit of a scuffle. I don't remember seeing a tutorial for combat in the starting zone, so this was about to be a new experience for me. So I ran up to the spider and did what any great hero would do and stabbed it in the back while it wasn't looking. The combat in this game is certainly a unique spin on tab targeting. You have a dial in the top left to help you determine the direction of your attack. There's even an option to shield bash, and you can even be defensive in a certain direction. What I ended up doing was standing still and trying to stab it, but unfortunately I was stood slightly too far back, which meant I couldn't land a hit, until I shuffled forward a couple of steps, and then all of a sudden I was able to stab it in its stupid ugly face. This went on for a bit, there's a bit of back and forth, and eventually I came to realise that I was going to die. So like the true tactician that I am, I had one more trick up my sleeve, and that was to run away. Whilst walking backwards and waving my sword, I noticed an option to call guards. So you bet your ass I called the guards over to help me.
Give me everything.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
It was now a 2v1, and I felt like I had a good chance of winning this fight. Eventually, the spider died, and apparently that earned me several achievements. Ooh, I just got an achievement. I then proceeded to wander around for another 10 minutes, couldn't really figure out what I was doing, so I went to zone chat and I asked, how do I build my first house? I wasn't too sure if I'd even get a response, but what actually happened was an explosion of life. All of a sudden, this game woke up. Essentially, the advice was I needed to place down a deed in order to build a house. Or alternatively, I could join someone else's village and build there. The general consensus was I'd be better off joining someone else's settlement, as this would mean my house wouldn't decay. So I went to the global chat and did what any noob would do and just asked to join someone's village. Hello all, I be a lonely peon looking for a village to build a humble shack. Can someone take pity on me and let me live in their walls? Listen, a little bit of roleplay can go a long way. If you don't believe me, ask your mum. And just like that, a settlement request came in. I was asked if I wanted to join the Ancient Oaks, and I happily accepted. I was then teleported to, well, I don't actually know I was teleported to. All I knew was that this was my new home. Now that I'd joined the village, I was eager to get on with my main goal, which was to build a house. Apparently, it's one of the main objectives when trying to complete the tutorial. It turns out one of the perks of joining the village was that it actually updated my map to give me several icons and locations. And yet, I still had no idea as to where I was on this island.
Hot diggity dog! This place is magnificent. An embarrassment of riches, as they say.
Blivy offered to give me a tour of the village, so he arranged to meet up by the dead decaying corpse of the huge troll. And after 2.5 hours of playing Wurm Online, I had officially met someone else in-game. Blivy then proceeded to give me a tour of the village, and it wouldn't be till much later on that I'd realised the actual scale and time taken to put all of this together. I have to say, I was actually kind of taken back as to how friendly everyone had been up until this point. Everyone was more than happy to answer my questions, give me advice, and Blivy here was even allowing me to build on their land and use their resources. It did make me wonder though, how large was the community for this game if they are being that catering to new players. The Steam charts would have you believe there's only hundreds of players still playing this game. But there is a standalone launcher and of course private servers, so it's hard to gauge the true amount of people still playing this title. But anyway, the tour was coming to an end, and Blivy here was about to show me my plot of land which I would build my future home on. It was everything I could have hoped for, apart from the bear in the back. That was a bit of a concern for me. But anyway, I was home and I was ready to build. Although there's one thing that had annoyed me since the very beginning of this game, which I felt I should ask Blivy about. After all this time of playing, I had never actually figured out how I could change the looks of my character. There was no character creator at the start. If you remember, I was just thrown directly into the tutorial. So I felt like I should probably ask at this point. It turns out you start with something called a golden glowing mirror, and if you click on this, it will allow you to actually edit your character. That's right, after completing the tutorial, wandering around aimlessly for 2 hours, I was only just finding out how to change the looks of my character. It was at this point I started to have concerns about building a house. But anyway, one sex change later, I was ready to go.
If you're homeless, just buy a house.
The funny thing about housing in MMORPGs is that it's usually considered endgame, whereas this, well, it's in the tutorial. Now luckily there's a shopping list of things to do, so I got to job number 1, which was chop down some trees. I just want to point out I'm not RP walking here, this is generally how slow you walk when you're not on pavement. Side note, this is the first MMORPG I've played with a speedometer. So step 1, I started to cut down a tree. It seems that tutorial wasn't a waste of time after all.
Just like the simulation.
As you can see, they've opted for realism when it came to the speed it takes to chop down a tree of this size. Now, impressively for a game of this age, the tree didn't just simply vanish into my inventory. Oh no, it laid on the floor and then I had to chop it some more, which then produced a log which I can carry over to my homestead, where I would then need to use a saw to turn these logs into planks. And trust me, the crafting gets way more complicated than this. I then proceeded to the next step, which was to flatten the land, and if you look in the bottom right corner, something interesting is happening. My skills are leveling up, in the most random numerical way, but they're leveling up. I then whittled a log into a shaft, and then that shaft I then turned to a mallet, and then that mallet I then used to plan my house. You're probably wondering where that donkey came from, but that's a whole different side quest I'll get to a bit later. Now the funny thing is, through the power of video editing, I have shown you all of this taking place in the space of a minute, when in actual fact it took me about 4 hours. And do you know what the worst bit was? I hadn't even started the real grind yet. All this time I'd been chopping down trees and shit, leveling up my skills, and I hadn't even got to the real grind. Planning your house is one thing, building it is something completely different. And the reason for that is because, for example, one wall will take 20 planks for you to build. I had 8 walls and a roof. But it gets worse. That's not 20 planks for one wall to be instantly constructed. No. I had to click build on that wall 20 times, using up 1 plank each time, for it to take 45 seconds for it to build, assuming my stamina hasn't run out. On 8 walls. Do the maths. But hey, I didn't get 27k subs on YouTube by not completing the tutorial. So I built that big ruddy house. And I built it good. ladies and gentlemen, several hours later, I give you Costa del Plob. It was totally worth the hours. Don't get me wrong, I had a real sense of achievement after building this house, but during the actual making of this house, I felt more like, well, this. The game is certainly grindy, but the knowledge required to do the most basic crafting and building, well, let's put it this way, it's that complex they have a built-in wiki. But I don't necessarily see this as a negative. I would say part of the game's charm is the fact that it is so complex and that it is something that is going to take a while to master. There is a sense of achievement you get when you do the most basic stuff in Wurm Online, and I think that dopamine hit is probably what keeps a lot of people playing this title. But it's also probably what makes people not play this title, because it can be very tough. I'm too ashamed to say how many hours it took for me to complete my house, but put it this way, it's enough that when I do look at the village that I'm a part of, I have nothing but respect for what they've achieved. There are a few things to take into consideration though. You can get better tools which will speed up some of the processes, and you can specialize in certain areas. There are an abundance of skills you will need to level up in order to progress in this game. And some of the crafting knowledge is locked behind different skill levels. And as much as it would be good to focus on everything at the same time, it's better spending your time focusing on one skill because they can be quite grindy. Believe me, I know, I'm level 14 in woodwork.
Oh my god, he on X Games mode.
But the beauty of this game is the fact that because it is so difficult, it encourages teamwork. It encourages you to speak to other players. Because yes, you could read the wiki, but let's be honest, sometimes it's just easier to speak to someone to understand what the frick you're doing. Imagine a MMO where players talk to each other. Crazy, right? Which brings me to the point of how I got my donkey. Because if I hadn't spoken up in chat, if I hadn't joined the village, if I hadn't made friends with these other people, I would have never found Dave the donkey. During one of several hours it took me to build my house, I actually got speaking to the other villagers and got invited along to go on a hunt so I can get some combat experience under my belt. Ironically, due to the mechanics of building a house and the fact that there was 45 seconds between each click, it gave me time to type and talk to my other villagers. And with all of this going on, it did make me wonder, why is this game labelled a Sandbox MMORPG when it clearly has more survival elements to it than RPG elements? I mean, hell, you even have a hunger and a thirst meter. But anyway, Blivy traded me a donkey and even sorted me out with a new sword, and we were off on our adventure. Blivy noticed a unicorn in the woods, so we went over to investigate. And before I knew it, the unicorn was under attack by Blivy. It was quite startling. Blivy essentially acted as a tank, whilst I crept round behind it and did the DPS. And just like that, our first beast was slain. We divided up the loot and moved on to the next creature. We proceeded to use the same tactics with Blivy tanking whilst I did damage. And as archaic as the combat might have looked, let's be honest here, was it really that different from any other tab-targeting MMORPG from its era? I don't think so. And that's when the penny dropped. It had been staring me in the face all this time. Do you know what this game actually reminded me of? RuneScape. Everyone always talks about WoW killers and trying to copy WoW, but maybe Wurm Online went a different route and it actually took inspiration from RuneScape. I can't imagine there's never been an argument as to whether Wurm Online is a MMORPG or just a MMO, and quite frankly, I don't think it matters, because in this day and age, when it comes to those two acronyms, they basically mean the same thing. I do find it curious, however, that Wurm Online labels itself as the ultimate sandbox MMORPG, when realistically, it probably would have been better off advertising itself as the ultimate survival MMO. Whilst I go through the pros and cons of Wurm Online, please enjoy this background footage of me being attacked by a spider whilst trying to build my house. So let's start the pros then. Let's be blunt here. There is no other game like this on the market right now. It is literally the only sandbox MMORPG with this level of complexity that I'm aware of. So what some might consider its weakness, I personally think it's its biggest selling point and its biggest strength. I think anyone truly looking for a social MMO, despite its lacking player base, it is still one of the most social experiences I've had in quite some time when it comes to reviewing MMORPGs. So if you're looking to make new friends while spending 10 hours building a house,
Best friends forever and ever. Oh, friend.
this is probably the game for you. I know I seemed angry about how long it took me to build my house, but I generally do feel like the crafting is some of the best I've seen in quite some time. Yes, it's a bit of a time sink, but the thought that's gone into it, like the fact that you have to smelt iron, and if you leave it in longer it gets to a higher temperature, which means only then can you craft in a particular way. There's a lot of detail that's gone into it, which honestly is just commendable. If you're someone who enjoys a bit of roleplay, and by that I mean being like a carpenter or a miner or even just like an innkeeper, this is probably the game for you. It lets you do it to the nth degree of complexity, which I'm sure a lot of people would appreciate. So let's move on to some of its biggest cons. So there's no getting around it, this game is a massive time sink. Even walking is a chore in this game and takes a lot of time, and there's no particular reason for it. It just feels like things are intentionally made to feel awkward and slow just so you spend more time in the game, which is not a good mechanic. Even with the addition of an inbuilt wiki and a tutorial as soon as you start, this game still explains very little. And worst of all, if you try and find the answer to a lot of these problems through Google or YouTube, these videos are 10 years old and terribly made. And I don't think that's a reflection on the creators, but just a reflection on YouTube 10 years ago. And I wholeheartedly believe this is the reason the player population is so low for this game. Because once you are out the tutorial, it's just, none of it makes sense. None of it.
I'm scared to death. I'm frightened and I don't know what to do. I'm confused and I want to go home.
Look, I don't want to be mean about this game, but the UI is terrible. Are you seriously telling me for a game that is almost 20 years old, this is the best they could do with the UI? This, like the wall of text everywhere. The graphics I don't really care about, but when I have to go through a really crappy UI, it's very off-putting. And one of the most surprising things about this game for me is the fact that it has zero social media presence. No one seems to be aware of this game, no one seems to have even played it. The biggest person to play this was Josh Drive Hayes as part of his worst MMO series, which is not necessarily the best thing to be part of, but no one else has even given this game a try, and I just feel like maybe if they actually publicized the game more, the population wouldn't be so low. And a bit of a controversial one, but I feel like because of the age of the game and the fact that the servers have probably never been wiped, some areas just feel a bit like a relic. They just feel like they've been abandoned by their previous owners and they're just sat there still surviving for whatever reason. If there is build and decay, then it's just too low. A lot of people would argue there's a lot more cons than that. The combat system, the graphics, the complexity. It doesn't know if it's an MMORPG or a survival game or both. But I honestly feel like those are the unique selling points of this title. But realistically, the biggest killer of this game is just the time it takes to play it. You need to properly dedicate your evenings if you're going to spend time in Wurm Online. As I said earlier, 15 minutes to build one wall, it's just off-putting. I don't have that much time to waste. And I'm saying this as a person making videos about MMOs that people don't play anymore. So the big question then, should you play Wurm Online in 2024? Honestly, if you have the time, give it a go. You might actually enjoy it. I definitely enjoyed my time playing it, I just can't justify my time playing it. And on that bombshell, I'm going to end the video there. And as always, I'd love to hear from you guys, and if you do have any suggestions as to any other old MMOs I should check out, let me know in the comment section below. And of course, if you've liked the video, feel free to leave a like. If you want to see more from me, feel free to subscribe, and I'll leave a couple of videos on the screen for you right now, which you might enjoy. And as always, a big thank you to my Patreon and YouTube members. You guys are honestly the best.